You're about to hear about some of the most horrifying crimes that happened in August 2025. These aren't just a list of events. They're stories of unspeakable tragedies that will leave you with more questions than answers. From a mass shooting in a quiet Montana bar to a family wiped out behind closed doors, we'll explore the darkest corners of human nature. These are the cases that shocked the nation, and we're going to get to the truth behind them. On August 1st, 2025, in the tranquil town of Anaconda, Montana, a community of just over 9,000 people was about to face a tragedy that would shock the state. A place where everyone knows everyone, the Owl Bar, a beloved local establishment, was a place of familiar comfort. On that Friday morning at approximately 10:30 a.m., it was a place of peace, with just a few patrons enjoying a quiet start to the day. That peace was violently shattered by Michael Paul Brown, a 45-year-old resident who lived next door to the bar. Brown, armed with a rifle, walked into the establishment and, in a brutal and unprovoked act of violence, opened fire on the 4 individuals inside. The victims were the bartender, 64-year-old Nancy Loretta Kelly, and 3 patrons, 59-year-old Daniel Edwin Bailey, 70-year-old David Allen Leach, and 74-year-old Tony Wayne Palm. All 4 were known in the community and were believed to be the only people present at the time of the attack. The manhunt was immediate and immense. Brown fled the scene, stealing a white Ford F-150. Law enforcement quickly located the abandoned truck a few miles outside of town, realizing that the suspect was on the move on foot. A tragic irony began to emerge. Brown, a former soldier with a combat deployment to Iraq and a stint in the Montana National Guard, was experienced in living off the land, a skill he had developed while fighting for his country. Now he was using those very skills to turn against his own people. For a full week, hundreds of law enforcement officers from dozens of local, state, and federal agencies, including the FBI and the ATF, descended on Anaconda. Helicopters and drones circled overhead, while K-9 units scoured the dense, rugged forests. The community was on high alert, with residents locking their doors as a collective sense of fear hung over the town. The pressure of the intense round-the-clock search eventually worked. On August 8th, a full 7 days after the shooting, Brown was captured inside an unoccupied structure near a state highway. His capture brought a collective sigh of relief, but the profound grief and the central haunting question remained. Why? As authorities and the public grappled with the senselessness of the crime, a deeper, more tragic picture began to emerge. Though authorities have not officially commented on a motive, court documents and family members paint a disturbing picture. Brown had reportedly struggled with severe mental illness for a long time, and his family had repeatedly sought help, but their pleas had gone unanswered. His niece stated publicly that this was not the act of a drunk, high man, but a sick man who doesn't know who he is sometimes. Brown now faces 4 counts of deliberate homicide. The case, once sealed from public view, has been partially unsealed, and the prosecution has stated its intention to seek the death penalty. The Montana bar shooting is a devastating reminder that for some, the greatest dangers are not found in the shadows, but in the troubled minds of those who walk among us. The victims were simply enjoying a quiet morning in a place they felt safe. Their deaths and the community's anguish are a testament to the immense and devastating impact of unchecked mental illness and unprovoked violence. Questions for discussion. The court records in this case were initially sealed, prompting a public debate about the balance between a defendant's right to a fair trial and the public's right to information. What are your thoughts on this issue? What responsibility do we have as a society to address the mental health crisis among our veterans and active military personnel? What changes are needed to ensure they receive the support they need before a tragedy occurs? Next on our list, we're heading to Atlanta, Georgia, for a case that hit a little too close to home for many. Join us as we explore the chilling details of the CDC shooting, an attack fueled by dangerous conspiracy theories. We're going to examine an act of public violence that was as shocking as it was seemingly senseless. The setting is not a dark alley or a desolate road, but a major American city outside the very institution tasked with protecting our public health. This is the story of the CDC shooting in Atlanta, Georgia. On August 8, 2025, in the late afternoon, the area around the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC headquarters, was buzzing with its usual activity. People were finishing their work weeks, and students from the neighboring Emory University campus were going about their day. But at approximately 4:50 p.m., the tranquility was shattered by the sound of gunfire. A gunman, later identified as 30-year-old Patrick Joseph White, opened fire from a CVS pharmacy across the street from the CDC campus. He was armed with multiple firearms, including a long gun, and proceeded to fire more than 500 rounds. Over 180 of those bullets struck 4 different CDC buildings, shattering windows, some of which were blast-resistant, and sending glass and shrapnel flying into offices. Miraculously, no one inside the CDC buildings was physically harmed. The shooting became a tragedy when DeKalb County police officer David Rose, 33, was the first law enforcement officer to arrive on the scene. A U.S. Marine Corps veteran who had served in Afghanistan, Officer Rose had been with the police department for just 11 months. He was a husband, a father of 2 young children with a third on the way. His colleagues described him as a man who ran toward danger when others ran away. True to his word, Officer Rose was shot and killed as he confronted the gunman. He was rushed to a nearby hospital but succumbed to his injuries. His death was a profound and heartbreaking loss for his family and the law enforcement community. Following the shooting of Officer Rose, White barricaded himself inside the CVS. A standoff ensued. When police finally entered the building, they found White dead from what the Georgia Bureau of Investigation later determined was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The motive behind this attack was chilling and directly tied to the very institution he targeted. In a search of White's home, investigators discovered written documents where he expressed discontent with the COVID-19 vaccinations. His father told police that White had become fixated on the COVID-19 vaccine, believing it was the cause of his chronic back pain and, more recently, his suicidal thoughts. Neighbors confirmed that White had become increasingly vocal about his anti-vaccine beliefs in the months leading up to the shooting. What makes this case so deeply disturbing is that it was not a random act of violence, but a targeted attack fueled by misinformation and conspiracy theories. The GBI confirmed that White had no prior criminal history, but had been reported to police on at least 3 prior occasions for suicidal threats, with his father even calling to report that he had obtained a gun. The guns used in the attack belonged to his father and were kept in a locked safe, but White had managed to access them. The CDC shooting is a sobering reflection of how the vitriolic rhetoric surrounding public health has escalated into deadly violence. Officer David Rose's death at the hands of a man consumed by distrust and paranoia serves as a tragic reminder of the real-world consequences of misinformation. The investigation concluded that White's death was a suicide and that he was not shot by law enforcement, putting a final tragic end to his rampage. The CDC shooting is a sobering and tragic reminder of the devastating consequences of misinformation and unchecked paranoia. Officer David Rose made the ultimate sacrifice, a true hero who ran toward danger to protect others. His death at the hands of a man consumed by distrust for the very institution he was trying to protect is a profound and senseless loss. And with that, we close the episode on a case that proves that ideology, when left to fester in a mind consumed by paranoia, can be as deadly as any weapon. The CDC shooting in Atlanta was a targeted attack on an institution, a calculated act of violence. But what happens when the violence is not a statement, not a message, but pure, unadulterated chaos? When the victims are chosen not for what they represent, but for simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Our next case takes us from the institutional setting of the CDC to the most ordinary of places, a Target parking lot in Austin, Texas, a family loading groceries, a dedicated employee doing her job, a routine day that ended in a nightmare, proving that sometimes the most terrifying acts are the ones that make no sense at all. Join us as we uncover the heartbreaking details of a random rampage that shattered 3 innocent lives. On the afternoon of August 11th, 2025, the otherwise calm and bustling North Austin Target at 8601 Research Boulevard was a place of routine activity. Shoppers strolling through aisles, families loading up their cars, and employees going about their tasks. What seemed like a regular Monday afternoon quickly turned into one of the most shocking and senseless acts of violence in Austin's recent history. The victims in this story were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the perpetrators' chilling randomness and violent behavior left a community shaken to its core. At approximately 2:15 p.m., as families prepared to leave the store and employees went about their business, 32-year-old Ethan Blaine Nienaker, a man with a history of mental health issues and a criminal record, began his brutal rampage. He approached Rosa Martinez Machuca, a 24-year-old transgender woman and beloved Target employee who was performing her job of collecting shopping carts in the parking lot. For reasons that remain unclear and unexplained, Nienaker suddenly opened fire, shooting and killing Rosa in an unprovoked attack. Rosa's life was tragically cut short, leaving those who knew her devastated. Beloved employee, Rosa was known for her warmth and creativity, and her fiancé described her as my sunshine. Nienaker's violence did not stop there. As he moved through the parking lot, he turned his attention to a family, Adam Chow, his wife, and their 4-year-old granddaughter, Astrid Fung, who were preparing to leave in their Toyota 4Runner. The senseless violence continued as Nienaker approached the car, opening fire on Adam Chow while he sat in the driver's seat. He then fired into the back seat, fatally striking Astrid Fung, the young child who was just 4 years old. In a terrifying and heartbreaking moment, Adam Chow's wife managed to escape with her granddaughter's lifeless body, carrying her away from the car in an attempt to flee the scene. Yet, in a moment of chilling indifference, Nienaker shoved her aside and stole the family's vehicle, leaving behind chaos and destruction. What started as a random act of violence in a Target parking lot quickly escalated into a citywide crime spree. After fleeing the scene in the stolen Toyota 4Runner, Nienaker led law enforcement on a reckless and violent chase through Austin. His erratic behavior included multiple car crashes, attempting to carjack a water truck, and assaulting the driver. He was seen throwing a brick into an acquaintance's home and attempting another carjacking. The Austin Police Department, along with several other agencies, pursued Nienaker across the city, desperate to end his reign of terror. The chase finally came to an end when Nienaker, now shirtless and barefoot, was found by officers and tased before being taken into custody. His bizarre behavior and violent actions throughout the city reflected a man spiraling out of control, driven by something far darker than any clear motive. As the full scope of Nienaker's attack became public, the faces of the victims quickly emerged, turning the case from an abstract tragedy into a deeply personal loss for families and loved ones. Rosa Martinez Machuca was described as a loving, creative individual who had recently transitioned and was bravely living her authentic life. Her fiancé described her as my sunshine, capturing the light and warmth she brought to those around her. Adam Chow, at 65 years old, was remembered as a loving husband, a devoted father, and a doting grandfather. Known for his kindness and his unwavering commitment to his family and faith, Adam's life was tragically cut short in a moment of senseless violence. Astrid Fung, just 4 years old, was described by friends as a girl who brought joy, laughter, and light to everyone she touched. The loss of this young life, full of promise and potential, is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this tragedy. Astrid's innocent presence in the world was violently extinguished in a random, brutal attack. The shooting at the North Austin Target was a shocking reminder that no public space is immune to violence. The victims of this attack were not faceless numbers. They were real people with families, friends, and loved ones who are now left to grieve their untimely deaths. This tragedy rocked the Austin community, where residents had once considered the Target parking lot just another part of daily life. Now, it will forever be remembered as the site of a brutal, senseless rampage that left several families shattered. The aftermath of the shooting also raised critical concerns about mental health and violent behavior. Ethan Nienaker's actions were a chilling reminder that unchecked mental illness can have devastating consequences. His criminal history, combined with a history of mental health struggles, painted a disturbing picture of a man who, despite previous warnings, was allowed to spiral into violence. Following his arrest, Ethan Nienaker was charged with 2 counts of capital murder for the deaths of Adam Chow and Astrid Fung, as well as first-degree felony murder for the killing of Rosa Martinez Machuca. These charges reflect the extreme violence of his actions and the irreversible harm caused to the victims' families. Nienaker's case will serve as a stark reminder of the deep-rooted issues of mental health, criminal behavior, and the consequences of unchecked violence. The community of Austin will have to reckon with the aftermath of the tragedy, while the families of the victims will face the long road of mourning and healing. The shooting at the North Austin Target was a random act of violence, but the impact was deeply personal. The victims were simply living their lives, working, shopping, and spending time with family, when their worlds were violently shattered by a man with a history of mental health struggles and criminal behavior. In the wake of this tragedy, Austin and the broader community are left asking difficult questions. What could have been done to prevent this senseless act? How can we address the underlying issues of mental illness and violence before they spiral into catastrophe? These are questions we must face as we continue to address the root causes of violence in our society. The story of Rosa Martinez Machuca, Adam Chow, and Astrid Fung is one of loss, but it also serves as a stark reminder of the importance of mental health care, intervention, and the need for society to respond more effectively to signs of violence before it's too late. In closing, the Austin Target shooting is a horrifying reminder that violence can erupt in the most mundane of places. The victims, Rosa, Adam, and Astrid, were simply living their lives when they were caught in the crossfire of a random, senseless attack. Their stories are a heartbreaking testament to the unpredictable nature of violence and the lasting trauma it inflicts on a community. What do you believe is the most critical step society can take to prevent random public violence like this, from addressing mental health to improving security measures? Our next case takes us to the quiet suburbs of Josephine County, Oregon. Here, a family's sanctuary became the scene of a horrifying crime, an intimate act of violence that shook a community to its core and left behind a single devastating question: how could this happen? Join us as we explore the chilling details of a family murder-suicide and the hidden darkness that lurks behind closed doors. In a quiet corner of Josephine County, Oregon, a horrific secret was locked away in a suburban home. On a seemingly ordinary Monday in August, the silence was broken, not by the chaos of a public rampage, but by the profoundly intimate horror of a family's final moments. This is the story of a murder-suicide that would wipe out a family of 5, leaving a community to grapple with how a place of sanctuary could become a tomb. Chain of events began on the evening of August 11th, 2025, when a request for a welfare check was called into the authorities. When deputies arrived at the family's home, they found a scene that no first responder should ever have to witness. All 5 members of the family were dead. The victims were the father, his wife, and their 3 children, ages 7, 9, and 11. Investigators quickly determined that this was a murder-suicide, a crime that is as rare as it is deeply disturbing. The evidence pointed to one chilling conclusion. The father had killed his wife and their 3 children before taking his own life. The method of death was not publicly disclosed, a final act of privacy for a family whose tragedy had been so violently exposed. This was not a crime of passion or rage. It was a calculated act of family annihilation. Psychological experts who study these rare cases say that family annihilation is often a desperate act of control by a perpetrator who feels his life is spiraling out of his command. This is not typically a crime of blind rage, but of a warped, twisted logic where the perpetrator believes he is rescuing his family from a perceived inescapable harm, whether it's financial ruin, public shame, or a personal crisis. By killing his family, he is also destroying himself, ensuring that his family will not have to face a future that, in his mind, is unlivable. Criminologists have identified different types of male family annihilators, and while the full story of the Josephine County father is unknown, his actions fit a grim pattern. Some perpetrators are anomic, seeing their family as an extension of their economic success, and when that success collapses, they believe the family has no reason to exist. Others are paranoid, killing their family in a twisted attempt to protect them from a perceived external threat. Still others are self-righteous or disappointed, seeking to punish the family for failing to live up to their ideals or for a perceived betrayal, such as a family breakup. Regardless of the type, the motive is rooted in a male's perception of his role and identity, and the murders are a final desperate attempt to reclaim a sense of control and perform a masculine role that he feels is being lost. The Josephine County case fits this disturbing pattern of hidden tragedy. The family was described by neighbors as ordinary and quiet. The children played in the yard and the parents were engaged in the community. There were no public warnings, no signs of the unimaginable darkness festering behind the front door. The fact that this could happen in a place where neighbors looked out for one another highlights the hidden nature of domestic tragedy and the terrifying reality that even in a seemingly perfect life, immense despair can be boiling just beneath the surface. The deaths of the 3 young children were particularly heartbreaking. Friends and teachers remembered them as bright, cheerful kids with promising futures. Their lives were cut short in the most brutal way, not by a stranger, but by the very person who was supposed to protect them. As investigators worked to piece together a motive, they examined the family's life for any signs of financial trouble, mental health struggles, or personal crises. However, the father's death took the answers with him. The community of Josephine County is left to grieve and to wonder if there were any missed signs, any moment when they could have intervened and prevented the unthinkable. The Josephine County family murder-suicide is a haunting reminder that tragedy can lurk behind any front door, and the most devastating acts of violence are often committed not by strangers, but by those we trust the most. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that a family sanctuary can, in the darkest of moments, become its grave. Questions to ponder. What are the societal factors that might lead an individual to believe that family annihilation is a justifiable or necessary act? How can communities and mental health professionals better identify and intervene in cases where an individual may be planning to harm their family? What is our responsibility as neighbors and friends when we sense a family might be struggling, even if there are no clear signs of violence? Our next case takes us from a quiet Oregon home to the digital world. where a mother documented her family's struggles on social media, admitting she felt like her life was withering away. We'll explore the heartbreaking story of the Long family and the tragic question of whether their devastating end could have been prevented. Join us as we uncover a story of betrayal, terminal illness, and a mother's final desperate act. In the quiet, picturesque town of Madbury, New Hampshire, the Long family seemed, to their neighbors, to be a perfect family. But behind the closed doors of their suburban home, a perfect storm of despair was brewing, a storm so powerful it would culminate in a final irreversible tragedy. On the evening of August 18th, 2025, authorities made a horrifying discovery. Inside their home were the bodies of 34-year-old Emily Long, her husband Ryan Long, 48, and their two young sons, Parker, 8, and Ryan, 6. The family's youngest child, a 3-year-old, was found unharmed, a fragile survivor in a house of horrors. A post-mortem examination would later confirm the unspeakable. Emily Long had shot her husband and her 2 children before taking her own life. This tragic act of family annihilation was not a spontaneous crime, but the horrifying conclusion of a long and desperate struggle. As investigators worked to piece together a motive, a digital paper trail of Emily's inner turmoil emerged. On her now private TikTok account, Emily had been documenting her life as a brain cancer wife. Her husband, Ryan, a school psychologist, had been diagnosed with glioblastoma, an aggressive and terminal form of brain cancer. In her videos, Emily openly expressed her fears and anxieties, painting a raw picture of a life consumed by grief and despair. In her posts, she spoke of the overwhelming burden of caring for a terminally ill husband, her worries about their financial stability, and the crushing fear of being left to raise her children as a single parent. "I swear this cancer will be the thing that breaks me," she wrote in one post, a haunting foreshadowing of the tragedy to come. She admitted to feeling very, very lonely and anxious, caught in the agonizing limbo of mourning her husband while he was still alive. In what was believed to be her final public post, Emily wrote about her struggle with depression and her desperate desire to hide under the blanket with my kids. She recognized her need for help, admitting, "I know that I need to see a therapist. I know that I need to ask for help." But in a final heartbreaking admission, she added, "I feel so guilty that I'm not ready to get help yet. I hope that I make the decision before I feel that it's too late." The New Hampshire Attorney General's office, while acknowledging the family's struggles, urged the public to avoid speculating that the tragedy was caused by a single stressor. However, the convergence of a terminal illness, financial strain, and severe mental health issues paints a clear picture of a family pushed to the very brink. The case of the Long family is a gut-wrenching reminder of the devastating consequences when a cry for help goes unheard. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that a person's public face of normalcy can hide a profound inner darkness, and that for some, the greatest fear is not an outside threat, but the monster of despair that lives within. The fact that a 3rd child was spared is an anomaly in these cases, and the silence of that small, innocent survivor is one of the most haunting parts of this tragedy. What made her different? Was Emily's resolve broken at the last moment? Was it a conscious decision or a terrifying moment of clarity? We may never know. Questions to ponder. Emily Long's case highlights a critical question. How can we create a culture where individuals feel empowered to seek mental health assistance before they reach a point of no return? In an age of social media where people share their deepest struggles, what is the role of the online community in recognizing and responding to signs of a mental health crisis? Given the tragic outcome, what resources and support systems could have been put in place to help a woman grappling with her husband's terminal illness and her own spiraling mental health? The Long family murder-suicide is a haunting case that forces us to confront the immense and invisible burdens some individuals carry. It's a tragic story that goes beyond the headlines, revealing a devastating convergence of financial ruin, terminal illness, and untreated mental health issues. The act of a mother taking her family's lives and her own is a chilling reminder of the finality of despair. If you were a neighbor or a friend who knew about the family's financial and health struggles, what signs might have prompted you to intervene? How can we better equip ourselves to recognize and respond to the warning signs of a family in crisis? This case was a heartbreaking look at a family shattered by a private spiraling crisis. It exposed the tragic consequences of mental illness and the immense burdens of terminal illness and betrayal. It was a story contained behind the walls of a family home. But what happens when domestic violence spills out onto the streets? When a domestic dispute becomes a public ambush and the victims are not a family, but the very people sworn to protect them? Our next story takes us to Tremonton, Utah, where a routine domestic violence call turned into a deadly ambush for 2 police officers. It's a grim reminder of the daily sacrifices made by law enforcement and the profound, unpredictable dangers they face in the line of duty. On an otherwise quiet Monday afternoon in Tremonton, Utah, a routine domestic violence call turned into an ambush and a nightmare for the local law enforcement community. The date was August 18th, 2025, and a small town known for its peaceful, quiet life was about to become the scene of a brutal and senseless tragedy. The incident began when the Tremonton Garland Police Department received a report of a domestic dispute at a home in the city. 2 officers, Sergeant Lee Sorensen, a 56-year-old veteran with 25 years on the force, and Officer Eric Estrada, a 31-year-old who had served his community for 4 years, were the first to respond. They were met by the suspect, Ryan Michael Bate, 32. What was expected to be a tense but standard encounter quickly escalated into a deadly ambush. Bate, armed with a gun, opened fire on the 2 officers, killing them both. A third officer, Box Elder County Sheriff's Deputy Mike Allred, a decorated veteran, and his K-9 partner, Azula, arrived on the scene shortly after the initial shots were fired. Deputy Allred was also shot and injured, and his K-9 partner was wounded as well. The suspect, Ryan Bate, fled the scene in a vehicle, leading law enforcement on a high-speed chase. The chase came to a dramatic end when Bate crashed the stolen vehicle. As a large police presence converged on the location, a tense standoff ensued. Authorities prepared for a prolonged confrontation, but in a surprising turn of events, several bystanders who had been witnessing the chaos approached Bate and managed to convince him to drop his weapon. With the weapon on the ground, law enforcement was able to move in and take Bate into custody without further bloodshed. The deaths of Sergeant Lee Sorensen and Officer Eric Estrada sent shockwaves throughout the state of Utah. They were both described by their colleagues and community members as dedicated, courageous officers who were deeply committed to their work. The fact that they were killed while responding to a domestic dispute, a situation that officers frequently face, highlighted the extreme and unpredictable dangers of police work. The funeral services for the 2 officers were attended by thousands of law enforcement personnel from across the state and the country, a powerful testament to the impact they had on their community and their brothers and sisters in uniform. Deputy Allred, who was injured in the attack, was released from the hospital a few days later, and his K-9 partner, Azula, was expected to make a full recovery. Ryan Michael Bate was charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder, a capital offense in the state of Utah. Prosecutors have also filed a notice of intent to seek the death penalty, ensuring that Bate will face the most severe consequences for his actions. Court records revealed that Bate had a prior history of domestic violence, and a previous case had been dismissed. Prosecutors have since refiled the prior domestic violence case against him. In closing, the Tremonton police shooting serves as a stark and tragic reminder of the profound dangers our law enforcement officers face every single day. The senseless murders of Sergeant Sorensen and Officer Estrada, both killed while responding to a domestic dispute, underscore the unpredictable nature of their work and the sacrifices they make to protect their communities. What do you think are the most effective ways for communities to support law enforcement officers and their families in the wake of such a tragedy? In closing, these cases from August 2025 serve as a somber reminder of the darkness that can exist in our world, from public violence to hidden domestic tragedies. The stories of these victims and the unsettling acts that took their lives challenge us to look closer at the world around us. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, domestic violence, or a crisis situation, please reach out for help. Call or text the National Crisis and Support hotlines. Your support helps us continue to shed light on these critical stories. Please like, subscribe, and share this video to help raise awareness and support the families affected by these tragedies.